A young woman, vibrant and in perfect health, suddenly died after drinking a smoothie. Her husband, a medical professional, refused an autopsy and insisted on cremation the very same day. Could this tragedy be hiding a string of secrets yet to be uncovered? Before the tragedy struck, in the early morning of August 16, 2023, pharmacist Betty Bowman sent a message to her lover. She said she had been drinking wine with her husband the night before and had started to feel unwell afterward. She couldn't sleep at all that night and was forced to cancel a scheduled appointment that morning. Just hours later, Betty's condition rapidly deteriorated. She was rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, part of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, with an initial diagnosis of severe food poisoning. Over the next 4 days, her condition worsened dramatically. Despite doctors' best efforts, they couldn't identify the cause. By the time her organs began shutting down one by one and she ultimately passed away, no one had any explanation for what had happened. What shocked many was that on the very day Betty died, her husband, Connor Bowman, immediately contacted the hospital to reject the idea of an autopsy and requested cremation as soon as possible. That decision raised red flags for Betty's friends. Connor's indifferent reaction to his wife's sudden death from poisoning and his haste to have her body cremated made them suspect he was trying to hide something. What made it even more suspicious was that Betty had shown no signs of illness before. She was an energetic and athletic woman, rarely got sick, and had no known genetic conditions in her family. At just 32 years old, she was in the prime of her life. Her sudden collapse left everyone in shock. In addition to her good health, Betty was known for her outgoing personality and warmth. She was well liked by everyone around her. Both she and her husband, Connor, shared a similar professional background and life philosophy. The couple had agreed to an open marriage, allowing each other to date other people as long as they remained honest about those relationships. From a young age, Betty had a personality that endeared her to everyone. She was born on December 13, 1990, in Wichita, Kansas. Even as a student, she loved adventure and had a passion for travel. Her social media pages were filled with photos of her exploring new places. According to her mother, Betty was always a calm and gentle child, someone who never hurt others and always wanted to help. That kindness and gentleness continued into adulthood. A former college classmate once recalled being terrified by a large spider on her car windshield. Not knowing who else to call, she reached out to Betty, who came over right away and gently removed the spider. Betty never harmed animals. In fact, she would sometimes name the spiders that lived in her home. It was during her time in school that Betty met Connor, the man who would later become her husband. Connor was 3 years younger than Betty, born on March 21, 1993. They met while studying at the School of Pharmacy at the University of Kansas and quickly grew close. In 2017, Betty earned her Doctor of Pharmacy degree and began her residency at the Stormont Vale Health Emergency and Trauma Center in Topeka, Kansas. Meanwhile, Connor stayed on to teach at the university while also serving as a toxicology specialist. Later, he was selected for a residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. That's when the couple relocated to Minnesota, where Betty began working as a surgical pharmacist at the Mayo Clinic. The place they worked at was far from just any medical center. Despite the name clinic, the Mayo Clinic is, in fact, a world-renowned nonprofit academic medical institution with a long and prestigious history. On August 2, 2016, U.S. News & World Report released its 2016 to 2017 rankings of the best hospitals in the United States. Out of more than 5,000 hospitals nationwide, Mayo Clinic claimed the number one spot. However, despite working in such a professional and prestigious environment, cracks began to appear in their personal lives. In April 2023, Betty returned to her hometown in Kansas to help her mother manage finances and prepare for a post-divorce move. During that time, Connor was working from home. Betty secretly confided in her younger sister that, even though she and Connor had agreed to be open about their relationships, she always felt like Connor was hiding something, that he wasn't being fully honest with her, and that suspicion may not have been unfounded. Connor had grown increasingly close to another woman, and even after their breakup, he remained emotionally affected for a long time. Under their agreement, though, Connor wasn't allowed to develop romantic feelings for others. Furthermore, since they had agreed to manage their finances separately after getting married, Betty had no idea that Connor was carrying a significant amount of debt. It wasn't until recently that Betty began to uncover the true scope of the issue. At one point, she accidentally came across part of a bill and some debt collection emails addressed to Connor. While both had pursued doctoral degrees and student loans were to be expected, the amount Connor owed was shockingly high, enough to leave Betty reeling. Her sister was equally alarmed after learning about it. She urged Betty to consider divorce, arguing that there was no way her sister could or should be responsible for paying off Connor's debts. Based on what she had observed, the sister suspected Connor had been spending large sums of money dining out, shopping, and possibly taking secret vacations with other women. She even raised the possibility that he might be secretly renting an apartment to live with someone else, without Betty ever knowing. The concerns extended beyond family. Even Betty's close friends had repeatedly advised her to walk away from the marriage. Still, Betty held on to hope, believing things were still under control, that change was possible if both of them were willing to work through it together. But reality slowly crushed that hope. In less than 2 months, Betty could no longer take it. Connor had become distant, showing little to no intimacy, while frequently spending time with other women, some of whom he even brought home overnight. What hurt Betty the most were the increasingly obvious lies. Whenever Connor claimed to be in meetings or working late, she would later find out he was actually on dates that had nothing to do with work. Her trust eroded piece by piece, taking down the foundation of their marriage with it. They had once agreed to always respect and be honest with each other, but over time, everything began to fall apart. Though they still lived under the same roof, they barely spoke. After 8 years together and 2 years of marriage, Betty made the decision to file for divorce. But before she could even meet with a lawyer, she was suddenly poisoned and died just days later. In the days leading up to her death, Betty remained in contact with her lover. On August 14, 2023, she called him to say she had a few days off and asked if he wanted to take a short trip with her. The next day, they met up. That evening, after returning home, she texted him saying she was having a glass of wine with Connor. Jokingly, she added that if she didn't wake up the next morning, they'd have to reschedule. The following morning, Betty abruptly canceled their plans. She said she felt extremely tired after drinking a smoothie mixed with wine that Connor had prepared for her, and that she hadn't been able to sleep all night. She confessed she was starting to suspect there was something wrong with the drink. Just a few hours later, her condition rapidly worsened. Connor rushed her to the hospital and contacted her family, saying they were in the emergency room. He explained that Betty was suffering from severe stomach pain and dehydration, but tried to reassure them that he would stay by her side and keep them updated. At the hospital, doctors initially diagnosed her with food poisoning. However, after administering standard treatments, her condition did not improve. In fact, it declined noticeably. As things grew more serious, Betty was moved to the intensive care unit. Her family, terrified by the news, couldn't get a flight in time, so they drove overnight to Rochester. But by the time they arrived the next morning, Betty was in critical condition, too weak to even sip water. While the family scrambled for answers, Betty's father called Connor, hoping for reassurance. Instead, Connor told him bluntly that Betty had only a 20% chance of survival. His tone was cold and detached, as if he were giving a clinical update on a stranger, not the woman he had spent years building a life with. Shortly after that call, on the 3rd day of her hospitalization, Betty slipped into a coma. That same day, Connor suddenly informed the doctors that his wife wasn't suffering from food poisoning, but rather a rare condition called hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, a severe inflammatory syndrome caused by immune system dysfunction, with symptoms including fever and dangerously low blood cell counts. According to medical literature, this condition is typically classified into 2 main types: congenital and acquired. The congenital form is caused by genetic mutations that trigger an overactive immune response from birth, while the acquired form can be linked to various triggers such as infections, tumors, or autoimmune disorders. Given how rare and complex the disease is, it's understandable that Betty's family had no idea what to question. They had no choice but to place their trust in Connor, not only her husband, but also someone with a medical background. Adding to their confusion, online research only reinforced Connor's claim. The symptoms Betty experienced, from fever to multi-organ failure, appeared consistent with the illness he mentioned. However, test results from the hospital showed no abnormalities pointing to HLH. Because the exact cause of Betty's illness remained undetermined, doctors had no choice but to treat each symptom as it emerged, addressing them case by case. Betty's initial symptoms included severe diarrhea and vomiting, but soon after, fluid began accumulating in her lungs, and both her heart and kidneys started to fail. She was taken into surgery to remove part of her intestine, but even that procedure didn't lead to any improvement. Then, on August 20th, 2023, after 4 days of unsuccessful treatment, Betty passed away in the hospital. Connor, still acting as both grieving husband and medical expert, quickly drafted a report claiming HLH as the official cause of death. Yet no clinical test ever confirmed that Betty had the disease. Just days after Betty's death, rather than taking time to mourn, Connor began appearing on social media, describing himself as a recently widowed single man, seemingly fishing for attention from other women. Even more unsettling, he started changing his version of events depending on who he was speaking to. Sometimes he said Betty died from food poisoning. Other times he claimed it was drug-induced fever. These strange behaviors raised red flags for Betty's loved ones. They couldn't shake the feeling that Connor might be hiding something. It all came rushing back. When Betty was first admitted to the hospital, doctors had initially suspected food poisoning, and Betty herself had told people she felt sick after drinking a smoothie cocktail. That very detail exposed another inconsistency. By protocol, when a patient like Betty dies suddenly with an unclear cause, an autopsy is required to determine what actually happened. Yet Connor, as her legal next of kin, not only declined the autopsy, but actively pushed for cremation as quickly as possible. His reasoning? He claimed Betty had specifically requested it before she died. In addition to quickly finalizing cremation paperwork and submitting forms to the medical examiner's office, Connor began repeatedly asking detailed questions about the differences between an independent autopsy and the hospital's internal testing, specifically whether anything might be discovered that the hospital could have missed. He seemed unusually fixated on each testing category, almost as if he were trying to anticipate what might be uncovered. Meanwhile, on August 21st, 2023, just 2 days after Betty's death, the Southeast Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office issued an official order to halt the cremation process. The agency immediately sent a letter to local police, stating that Betty's death showed several suspicious signs and warranted further investigation. One reason for this swift action came from a formal complaint filed by a mutual friend of the couple. This person stated that Betty and Connor's marriage had been seriously strained due to infidelity and financial issues, and that they had been actively discussing divorce. What raised particular concern was that despite never having prepared drinks for her before, Connor had suddenly taken the initiative to make Betty a smoothie cocktail at the most sensitive point in their relationship. That unusual detail prompted Rochester police to launch a deeper investigation. They began questioning friends and colleagues of the couple. One of Betty's close friends told investigators that just days before Betty became ill, she had visited the couple's home. That day, Connor made Betty a smoothie. As soon as Betty took a sip, she noticed a strange taste and asked her friend to try it too. The friend said she immediately detected a bitter flavor and instinctively spat it out. Half joking, she asked Betty if Connor might be trying to poison her. They both laughed it off, and Betty jokingly replied, "Who knows, maybe he is." Then, without hesitation, she walked over and poured the rest of the smoothie down the sink. Adding to the suspicion, another friend told police that before Betty's death, Connor had casually mentioned he would receive a $500,000 life insurance payout if something terrible were to happen. After the funeral, this friend stopped by the couple's home and was shocked to find that one of Connor's girlfriends had already moved in. They were laughing, hugging, and acting completely carefree, as if nothing had ever happened. With this new information in hand, authorities obtained a warrant to search the couple's home. Inside, they found a bank receipt showing a transaction of $450,000, though it remained unclear whether it was connected to Betty's life insurance policy. At the same time, they discovered that Connor had used his credentials as a medical professional to illegally access Betty's electronic medical records, including her hospital admissions, prescriptions, allergy history, surgical notes, and follow-up appointments. What raised even more concern was that Connor continued logging into the hospital's data system even after Betty had passed away. While this behavior wasn't necessarily illegal, it was highly irregular. Investigators became particularly interested in the fact that he repeatedly accessed his wife's medical records without any clear purpose. By standard protocol, authorized access is automatically revoked once a patient dies. Yet, from August 20th to August 23rd, 2023, Connor regularly reviewed Betty's electronic health records. It didn't stop there. On August 22nd, Connor deliberately created a blank medical case file and added himself to Betty's care team in the hospital database. This maneuver gave him unrestricted access to her complete medical history without needing any further authentication. In addition to his hospital duties, Connor also worked as a toxicology expert for the University of Kansas, regularly taking remote shifts on their 24/7 poison control hotline. To perform this role, he was issued a work laptop with a VPN-certified login system that required identity verification. Every action taken on the device was recorded and monitored by administrators. While reviewing his activity log, authorities discovered that on August 5th, 6th, and 10th, Connor had logged into the system and repeatedly searched for information about a drug called colchicine, a medication commonly used to treat gout. Medical literature indicates that colchicine has a very narrow therapeutic window. The typical daily dose ranges from 1.2 to 2.4 milligrams, but ingesting between 7 to 26 milligrams can cause severe poisoning. The initial symptoms include intense gastrointestinal distress, which can quickly progress to multiple organ failure. There is no known antidote for colchicine. Treatment is largely supportive, focusing on managing symptoms. Despite these searches, when police reviewed all emergency hotline call records during the period Connor conducted his research, they found no calls related to colchicine. Other poison control staff working the same shifts confirmed that there had been no inquiries involving the drug. Further investigation of Connor's work-issued laptop revealed that he had accessed multiple scholarly journals and toxicology databases. He also used a dosage calculator to estimate a lethal dose of colchicine for a person weighing 119 pounds, which happened to be Betty's exact weight. Most alarming of all, just one day after completing his research, Connor placed an order for injectable colchicine through an online pharmacy. He used his official work email to place the order, completed payment during regular business hours, and then deleted all traces of the transaction from his system. However, the laptop's internal logging software automatically saved a detailed record of his activity, allowing investigators to reconstruct his steps. When cross-referenced with the pharmacy's order records, every detail, including the dosage, delivery address, and billing information, matched Connor's personal account exactly. In an attempt to deny responsibility, Connor claimed that Betty had impersonated him to place the colchicine order. However, the pharmacy later revealed that it was actually Connor who contacted their customer service, asking to have the order deleted from their system. He explained that he had previously been reprimanded by the hospital for using company funds to purchase sildenafil and didn't want a repeat of that situation. Investigators also discovered that on August 5th, 2023, Connor had researched dosage information for castor oil and subsequently ordered it from an online retailer. This raised suspicions that he may have initially planned to poison Betty using castor oil, but when that failed, turned to colchicine instead. Following this lead, police collaborated with the forensic team to reanalyze Betty's blood and urine samples using more advanced testing methods. The final results confirmed what investigators had suspected all along. The true cause of Betty's death was colchicine poisoning. She had never been diagnosed with gout, had no prescriptions for colchicine, and had never purchased the drug. This left only one logical conclusion. She had been poisoned by someone else. Just days after the toxicology results were confirmed, on October 20th, 2023, Connor, then 30 years old, was arrested. Ironically, only a week earlier, he had hosted Betty's funeral, appearing visibly emotional and projecting the image of a grieving husband. He even played a slideshow of their memories together to reinforce the picture of a happy marriage. Despite the mounting evidence, Connor was initially charged with second-degree murder. While his repeated searches for lethal substances suggested clear premeditation under Minnesota law, the charge could not be elevated to first-degree murder until a grand jury formally reviewed and approved the upgrade. That decision came on July 5, 2024, when the grand jury officially indicted Connor on first-degree murder charges. He was ordered held in jail pending trial, with bail set at $2 million. Ahead of the trial, Connor's defense team filed a motion challenging the legality of the search warrant. They argued that seizing 14 electronic devices and a tablet constituted overreach and amounted to a serious violation of the defendant's privacy. Furthermore, they contended that because both Connor and Betty worked in healthcare, many of their personal devices contained sensitive patient information. This data, they claimed, should have been protected under doctor-patient confidentiality laws. Nevertheless, police proceeded to extract data from the devices without applying any special safeguards. Based on these arguments, the district judge agreed with the defense, stating that law enforcement had failed to fully consider the unique professional background of the defendant when conducting the search. When police initially applied for the warrant, they already possessed key information, including the deterioration of Connor's marriage, his financial distress, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Betty's death. As such, the court ruled that the search warrant should have clearly specified and limited the scope to areas directly relevant to the investigation, such as toxic substances, controlled items, financial records, divorce-related documents, or materials pertaining to the couple's relationship. Instead, investigators broadly seized and examined all of Connor's electronic devices without such limitations. In reality, investigators did not exercise appropriate caution. Notably, when they submitted a second warrant request, more than a month later and after having gathered additional evidence, police still reused nearly the same language from the original filing, without narrowing the scope to reflect the progress of the case. As a result, they collected and extracted a significant amount of medical data, leading to a serious violation of healthcare privacy protections. In accordance with legal standards, the court ruled that all data obtained from the 13 electronic devices and one tablet must be rendered inadmissible. At this time, the trial remains on hold as the court considers whether dismissing this evidence will materially affect the prosecution's case against Connor. However, according to police sources, if the data is deemed legally unusable, it will be excluded from the investigation and barred from public disclosure. What do you think about this case? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next case we cover.